Congressman Kildee, on Tuesday night during the State of the Union address, your guest seat was empty. Why?
Well, I left that seat open for Amir Hekmati, who is my constituent, one of the people that I represent in Congress. And I felt as if there were any one person that I could bring to Washington to sit and watch the State of the Union, it would be Amir. And of course, he can't come because he continues to be held in Evin prison in Tehran. So as a gesture to raise consciousness about his situation, I left the seat vacant in his honor.
Amir has now been in prison in Iran for 3 years.
Right.
I understand that you brought up his case with President Obama on that night?
I did.
What did the president have to say?
Well, he reassured me that they continue to pursue his release. I've spoken to the president a number of times about this, and so when I raised it with him after the State of the Union address, he said yes, and he reiterated the facts of the case and did say that he intends to continue to pursue his release. I also spoke with Secretary Kerry, Samantha Power, who's our UN representative. All of them are very much aware of the case and continue to press for his release.
Secretary Kerry was in Geneva last week and he spoke with the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, and we understand that he also brought up Amir's case with the Foreign Minister. Did Secretary Kerry have any good news for you?
He didn't give me any details other than to say that they do continue to raise it and that they've raised the case at every opportunity, whether with Minister Zarif or other members of the negotiating party. The fact that we have the P5+1 negotiation underway, of course, is unprecedented in recent history in that it gives the American government a chance to have face-to-face discussions with representatives of Iran's government. So in some ways it's a step in the right direction, although the differences on the nuclear question are so great that we continue to hold out some hope that they will produce some results, but it's far from certain that it will.
You were quoted as saying that night that your understanding is that Amir is now more concerned about his family than his own situation. Are you aware of any communication between him, anybody from the U.S. and him? Does the U.S. interest section with the Swiss Embassy in Tehran have access to him?
Well, there has been some limited communication between Amir and his family. It's not consistent and it's not for very long, but in the last several months he's been allowed to have, again, very limited communication with the outside. And so when his family has had that opportunity, his concerns are always for them, for his parents, for his sisters, his brother. I think it just says something about him. Here he is, all alone, in a prison, but his principal concern is how his family is dealing with this really difficult situation.
Is this communication via phone, and does he say anything about the situation in detention?
I mean, other than to describe his conditions, in fact, he did have a letter released recently to President Rouhani describing his conditions, the conditions of his confinement. Only modestly improved conditions from his initial condition of incarceration when he was in solitary confinement. But it's still, it's not a situation that's a positive situation. We're obviously concerned about his mental health, his well-being, his physical condition, and the situation he's in is one that's really, really tough.
I'm sure you're aware that the Senate is considering different legislation on imposing more sanctions against Iran. One, are you for or against that move? And number two, do you think, should they pass such legislation, it may affect Amir's case and the case of other American Iranians held in detention in Iran?
Right, well, it certainly could have an impact. My concern right now is that the sanctions that have been in place are the sanctions that have brought us to this point now, where the first time in 35 years we have a chance to have negotiation. So the sanctions that have been imposed are working. And my concern is that if the Congress, without an understanding of the sensitivity of the current discussions, puts the U.S. in a position where these multilateral discussions could be altered by the U.S. deciding we're going to impose additional sanctions all on our own, that it would be counterproductive. Even during this period of negotiation, the U.S. has executed additional sanctions when necessary. So we have continued to impose, under the current sanctions regime, economic sanctions against Iran. So it's not as if we don't have those sanctions serving their purpose and that they provide a certain amount of leverage. My fear is that the notion of additional sanctions is not intended to make these negotiations succeed, but in fact on the part of some may be intended to ensure that they fail, because there are some who don't believe we should be having these discussions at all. I disagree, and I think it's really important that we do everything we can to make sure that we have the greatest chance for success in the nuclear negotiations. It'll be better for Iran, certainly better for the U.S., better for the region, ultimately better for the world.
Do you think, should such a bill pass and come to the House may also approve it? It's
possible. I haven't done an analysis of what the votes would look like in the House, but if the Senate were to pass it, it would certainly very likely come up on the floor of the House, and I would be concerned that it might pass. The President has said that he would veto such legislation. I think that's the right approach. I do think it's important for Iran, though, to understand what might be motivating some members of Congress to talk about additional sanctions, in its increasing impatience with the negotiating process. It's good that they understand that there's anxiety, and it's, I think, particularly important that they understand that the Congress is going to have to be a party to whatever is ultimately negotiated. And of course, I have offered on many occasions to the Iranian government, one way to ensure greater legitimacy in the negotiating process would be to release the Americans that are being held right now, because it does seem to color the view of American members of Congress when we're negotiating with a nation that, from our perspective, continues to hold political prisoners. That to me is something that can't be tolerated, and it would go a long way in establishing a greater legitimacy to the negotiations if they were to do that.
You mentioned that you've made statements to the Iranian government. Have you been directly in touch with them?
No, I mean, we use every channel that we can, and there have been formal and informal communications, and I would rather not specifically address the channels that we have utilized, but we've made many of those statements in public as well, and we know that the Iranian government officials pay attention to the news media reports, and we know that they have acknowledged that they've seen those comments that we've made.
Congressman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.